Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Previously, we talked about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his birth, his childhood, and his youth leading up to the time that Islam came. In order to best understand why Islam came and what purpose it was trying to achieve in that society, it is important to understand Jahiliyyah or the age of ignorance. When we study the subject of the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we usually call Jahiliyyah the time of the Arabs before Islam arrived. However, Jahiliyyah, it is important to note, is a phenomenon that can exist in any society at any point in time, and it can happen now and it can happen in the future, which is what Amirul Mu'mineen Umar bin al-Khattab meant when he said, "The bonds of Islam will be undone one by one when there will be a generation brought up in Islam who does not know what Jahiliyyah means." May Allah not let us be the generation that does not understand. There are different aspects of Arabia before Islam. The first aspect that we will be considering is the political situation. Now we know that there was no overall king at that time. It was not the kingdom of Saudi Arabia or something like that. And there was a tribal government, different tribes had tribal leaders. The important thing was tribal solidarity and collective interest. The tribal leaders could often have dictatorial privileges. There was rivalry amongst cousins, rivalry in proving who is the most hospitable, rivalry in impressing the poets who were the most respected people of the day, and also the spokespersons of the families that they represented. Now we can consider the regions of Arabia. One were the border tribes. On one side of Arabia was Syria, which was controlled by the Byzantines. On one side was Iraq or Persia, which was controlled by the Persian Empire, and the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire, of course, were the superpowers of that time. So the tribes who used to live on the borders were usually subservient to the foreigners who controlled them. They would fluctuate between Iraq and Syria. They were kept in ignorance, oppression, and injustice. The fruits of their land were used by their foreign masters, the way feudal lords of today do it. Now within Arabia, as we remember, there was not any king, so they were generally disunited. They did not come under the direct control of any of the neighboring powers, but there was conflict, tribal conflict, religious conflict, and racial conflict. And finally, we come to Hijaz. The leaders of Hijaz were esteemed and respected. Makkah was the religious center, and they were the caregivers of pilgrims. Next, we come to the religious aspect. Religion was defined by polytheism, idolatry, and superstition. And here we are talking about the religion primarily of the people of Quraysh on whom Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came, and it was also the majority religion of Arabia. They had started with the Abrahamic faith when Ismail ﷺ had settled down there, and the beliefs of the Abrahamic faith had gone down, and they still believed in Allah, and they had a love for Kaaba, the house of Allah. However, there was a revered Khuzah chief called Amr bin Luhai, who was well known for being very religious and pious, who went to Syria, and there he found that Syria, which is the locus of prophets, has also become a place where idol worship is going on, and therefore he thought that idol worship is a good thing, and he brought back the idol Hubal, which was placed next to the Kaaba. Then there was Lat, the idol of Taif, Manat, which was worshipped somewhere on the Red Sea, and Uzza, and every household had its own idol. And by the time Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came and conquered Makkah and he destroyed the idols around the Kaaba, there were 360 of them. Now idolatry involved devotion to idols, seeking refuge from idols, doing pilgrimage to them, going around them, worshipping them, even prostrating before them. Sacrifices were made in their name, and some animals used to be consecrated in the name of idols for different reasons. Then they had superstitious traditions and beliefs. One was that divining arrows are used to make any decision. So when Hazrat Abdul Muttalib was deciding which of his sons is going to be sacrificed according to his vow to Allah, divining arrows were used. And they had soothsayers, and they believed in signs, portents, and omens. Like some people say that the number 13 is unlucky, and if a black cat crosses your path, you should go back home. It is not lucky to go ahead and do what you were doing. They also preserved the Abrahamic traditions, devotion to Kaaba, Tawaf, Hajj, and Umrah. So they had made these additions, and they thought that they were good additions, not bad additions. And this was about the pagans. Then we also had Christianity, Judaism, Magianism, and Sabianism, all religions which had free access to Arabia. Then we come to the social life of Arabia. First of all, the women. Now, the noble women had a very different life to the slave women. The noble women could be very highly esteemed, they had considerable free will. However, it was basically a patriarchal society, and when it came to marriage, the decision was made by the guardian of the woman, and everything related to her marriage contract was in control of her guardians and not in her own control. So, when we say free will and influence, we don't necessarily mean the kind of free will and influence that feminists talk about in this day and age. We know about Hazrat Khadija Raziallah Ta'ala anhu. Before Islam arrived, she was a highly respected woman of her tribe, and she used to do trade and send agents to do trade for her in other countries. So we have some idea of what it was like to be honored and respected in your society. And it was in both a positive sense and a negative sense, like it is in all societies today as well. There was no proper law for marriages. There were multiple kinds of marriages that could take place in pre-Islamic Arabia. You could have unlimited wives. The process of divorce was not very regular and well defined either. Husbands had complete control over it. They could divorce their wives at any time and as many times as they wanted. Adultery was very common in the society. Children could be very dear to their parents, but on the other hand, baby girls could be buried. Male children were a symbol of prestige, a guard against enemies, and a way to carry the name forward. Then we come to the family life. Family life was all about tribal pride. Their motto was that your brother should be supported whether he is the oppressor or he is the oppressed. And we saw what happened when As bin Wa'il took the goods from the merchant and refused to pay up for them. Initially, the merchant went and asked for help from the tribes of Quraysh who were in confederation with his tribe, and they had not felt able to help him. And so when the Hilf al-Fudul happened and the Arabs got together and decided that no matter what, no matter if the oppressor is our brother, we are not going to allow it to happen, it was mentioned that it was not something that was in line with their own tribal traditions, it was more in line with the religion that was to come on them. There was avarice for leadership, there was tribal warfare, the intertribal relationships were very weak except in the case of alliances, and alliances could last for a very long time. We have seen that alliances that had been there in pre-Islamic Arabia lasted after Islam arrived as well. So to sum up, they were people groping in dark and ignorance, they had lots of superstitions, women were marketable commodities or inanimate objects. The greed for power was so strong that it could lead to futile wars. Next we come to the economical aspects. We already know that trade was the main source of livelihood for the Arabs. However, trade has requirements. Trade requires that the caravan routes are secure, and it also requires intertribal harmony. We have mentioned that they used to often make trade trips during the sacred months because tribal harmony was something that was not easily available over there. In this day, we have seen a parallel in what China is trying to do with its Belt and Road Initiative. Because it passes through the whole world, it tries to limit any military threats that come to it through its rivals, either economic rivals or political rivals, because it is very important for the trade project to go ahead, for there to be no military threat. And in some sense, it was the same thing that was there, and that is why Hashim had gone and talked to the Byzantine king, and he had secured the safety of the caravan routes at that time. And the sacred months were used for trade, and they were also used for the Okaz market and other markets. There was not actually any industry. Knitting and tannage was done by people from Yemen, Hira, and the Syrian border. Farming and stock breeding to some extent were done. The women, all the Arab women used to do yarn spinning, but once again that used to be threatened by wars. So basically trade was their be all and end all, and they knew that if the trade did not work out, they would not necessarily have much to fall back on, which is why the Meccans were so upset when the Muslims migrated to Medina, and they felt that that would be a threat to their caravan routes. So the prevailing features of society were poverty, hunger, and insufficient clothing, and it was not a very rich society. Finally, we come to the ethics. Now we need to know that there are good and bad people in every society. It was the same for Arabia before Islam, and obviously there was a reason that Islam came on Arabia. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself said that I am from the best of nations and the best of tribes and the best of families. So we cannot say that they were all bad and Islam came on them, and not just did Islam come on them, but Islam was the religion for all worlds and all times, and therefore it had to come on a people who were capable of taking on the difficult burden. And so they did have positive sides. We know that they greatly admired oratory and poetry, and grip on the language was something that was very important to them, and hospitality was a big feature for them, competing with each other in hospitality towards guests, and they could make any sacrifice to show hospitality. Once they made a promise, they knew that it has to be kept no matter what. Comparable to Islam saying that a Muslim does not break his promise and a hypocrite is somebody who breaks his promise. So pre-Islamic Arabia was a society in which the keeping of a covenant was considered important. We know Abdul Muttalib and his sons were determined to keep the vow that he had made to Allah, and once the blood money in the area was increased because of Abdullah's incident, it did reduce the bloodshed in the land, which shows us that they did consider it important to pay up blood money even after committing murder. So they did have some principles and ethics in society, which combined with their geography was the reason they were chosen for the message. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.